When I was a little boy, my Aunt Laura lived with us. She was really my great-aunt, my daddy's Aunt Laura Moody. She had lived with my grandmother till my grandmother died the same year I was born. And then she became what my daddy called a floater. I mean, she'd live at our house for 2 or 3 months, and then one Sunday afternoon, we'd take her for a ride. When we'd come back home, she'd be out at Aunt Esther's house. 2 or 3 months later, Aunt Esther would float her down to Aunt Mary's house. Then Aunt Mary would float her down to Uncle Frank's house, and finally she'd come back to our house. I loved it when she was at our house. She was the first person I ever met who loved me no matter what. Aunt Laura was the oldest living thing I'd ever seen. She had worked out in the sun all of her life, and her skin was so wrinkled and brown she looked like she was made out of wadded up brown paper bags. Her skin was that color and just that rough, and it had so many wrinkles. I used to think if you could take her skin off and flatten out all those wrinkles, that skin would cover a good-sized room. She could get up earlier than anybody I ever saw. Didn't make any difference how early I got up. I'd go to sleep at night thinking, wake up early, wake up early, wake up early. Get up as early as I could in the morning, go straight into the kitchen. Aunt Laura was already there. Fire built in the stove, ready to cook breakfast for whoever came along. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I'd say, Aunt Laura, how do you get up so early? She'd look at me and say, Law, son, I get up at the crack of dawn. I said, Aunt Laura, can you hear the crack of dawn? She said, yes, I can hear it. And it wakes me up. And once I've heard it, nobody else can. And everybody else just has to get up the best way they can. But I'll tell you what, she said, one of these days when I'm dead and gone, I'll leave that to you. And you'll be able to hear the crack of dawn. Her job at our house was to wash the dishes. We didn't make her do it, but she said my mother didn't do it right. So we let her do it. You see, my daddy had remodeled the kitchen. He had taken out the old sink that was bolted to the wall and bought a new big sink at Sears Roebuck, so big he had to borrow my uncle's pickup truck to bring it home in. It was all white enamel with the sink in the middle, Ripley drain boards on each side, drawers underneath for silverware, little doors at the bottom you could put pots underneath. And the most remarkable thing about the whole sink was that it had a stopper that worked. And for the first time in her life, my mother could make water stay in the sink. And it spoiled her. She started washing dishes in the sink. Aunt Laura says that's not the right way to do it. That's a waste of water. You're supposed to wash dishes in the dishpan so that you can carry out the water and pour it in the flower bed. So we let her do it. She was a little short woman. She couldn't reach down into the sink without a turned upside down Coca-Cola crate to stand on. She had put the dishpan in the sink, wash all the dishes in the dishpan, stack them up in the drain on the side, pour boiling water over the silverware. And then she was ready to take out the water. She would open the back door, prop it open with the yellow flint rock she kept there for a doorstop. Come back to the sink, pick up the dishpan, step down off the Coca-Cola crate, back up, and run for the door. Little tiny steps out the back door, down a tiny little step to the back porch. Across the porch had a rail around it. And Aunt Laura would run till she hit the porch rail, and the porch rail would stop her, but the water would keep going right over out of the dishpan and down onto the flower bed. Never looks like it did the flowers much good to me. One night she went out the door and didn't come back. I looked out, all I could see was dark. I called my daddy. He came. About the time he got there, she was coming back in the door. The porch rail hadn't held. And Aunt Laura had gone right on off in the yard, dishpan, water, and all. It had taken her so long to come back inside because when she hit the ground, she'd lost her glasses and she was trying to find them before she came back. And as I saw her coming in the door, I got excited. She wore thick, rimless glasses that would turn into mirrors when she looked at you. And all of my life, I had never seen one of her eyes. And I got so excited because as she came back in the door, she had her glasses on, but one lens was missing. And I thought, I'm going to get to see one of her eyes. But that's the side that had hit the ground, and that eye was swelled shut. Every night after supper, Aunt Laura used to take me out to teach me about the stars. She'd say, son, you have to be able to know what time of year it is just by looking at the stars. Know what time of night it is just by looking up at the stars. We'd go out into the cow pasture, stretch out on the ground. If it was wintertime, she'd say, now put your feet toward the Bergen's house. That was north. Summertime, put your feet toward the Mahaffey's house. That was southwest. And then we'd start, usually with the Big Dipper, working our way around the sky to learn about all the stars. She would say, you can call it the Big Dipper if you want to. But she called it the wain, the old English hay wagon with its long, curving wagon tongue. We'd go from those pointers up to find the North Star, not nearly as big as it ought to be for people who don't know how to find it. In the wintertime, my favorite was Orion, looking down out of the southern sky, watching what we were doing at Plot Creek. Or in the summertime, the whole parade of constellations across the southern sky. My favorite one, the Scorpion with his long arms and his red beating heart that would pulse right there in the sky. Sometimes I'd say, Aunt Laura, why do I need to learn about all the stars? And she'd say, someday, son, you'll grow up and you'll be able to go most anywhere you want to. And when you go a lot of places, you'll get homesick. When you get homesick, remember this: everybody lives under the same sky. Just wait till it gets dark, then go outside, and the stars will take you home. Aunt Laura never got married. It's not because she never met any men. It's really because she never met a man she loved as much as she loved dental Scotch snuff. She wasn't going to quit dipping snuff to get married to anybody. She dipped it 24 hours a day. Her lip was always full. You could smell her coming before you could see her. That snuff breath turned the air sweet with its smell. You could tell whether she was breathing out or breathing in. It would just hit you in waves. I finally decided she's brown, not from working in the sun all her life, but because she's dipped snuff so long, she's just full of it. And all that snuff's coming to the surface, making her snuff-colored. She always kept a big, full box on the dresser in front of the mirror. She'd cut the whole corner out of the box so that she could get it out. The boxes had little metal spouts on the side, but Aunt Laura would say, whoever invented these little metal spouts doesn't dip snuff. You can't get snuff out of that little hole. So she'd cut off the whole corner, load up a little tin can to keep in her apron pocket so she wouldn't run out. One day when nobody was at home, I decided I should try that stuff. Aunt Laura loved it. It had to be good. Looked just like what my mother made hot chocolate out of. So I waited till I was sure nobody was there, then slipped in her room. I knew exactly what to do. She always loaded in front of the mirror, and I'd watched her do it 10,000 times. There it was, a full box. She wouldn't miss a thing. Got right in front of the mirror just like she did it. Picked up the box with one hand, pulled out my lip with the other, turned up the box, and with a little finger, tap, tap, tap. Nothing happened. Must be doing something wrong. Try it again. Tap, tap, tap. Nothing happened still. Shook the box up a little bit. One more try. Lip way out, box in the air, little finger, tap, tap, tap. And when that snuff started sliding, it didn't stop. The whole box full, like a truck dumping a load of sand, out of the box, right down into and through my mouth, and it hit me with such a shock that I went, that was the wrong thing to do. I thought somebody had blown up the house. Everything was going up in the air and then back down again. The air full of snuff dust, then settling out everywhere. A box of snuff will cover a good-sized room. Aunt Laura saved my life that day. She was the first person back to the house, and she helped me clean it up. She said, son, let me tell you something. If you ever have to clean up a whole lot of snuff again, please don't use water. If there's anything worse than this snuff dust, it's what you might call snuff mud, especially on my white chenille bedspread. But she cleaned it up, saved my life. One night, a while after that, my brother and I were asleep. It was the middle of winter time, middle of the night. My daddy came into the room to wake me up. He said, get up and go with me to milk. I loved to go with him to milk. I always went in the summertime, sometimes went in the winter. Got out of bed, slipped on my clothes, and we went down to the kitchen. Got the milk bucket there and went out onto the back porch. He had a light switch on the back porch which he could flip and turn on a light on the side of the barn about 100 yards down through the pasture from the house. And he flipped that light switch on, and when the light came on, we could see that there had been a big ice storm in the night before. The whole world was covered with ice. The yellow bell bushes stuck to the ground, pine trees with their heads bent over, hardwood trees armored with a coating of ice, and the whole ground sparkling from our house through the trail of the light all the way out to the barn. He got me by one hand, got the bucket in his other hand. We slipped down the steps, and then without ever picking our feet up, we scooted on top of the ice out through the pasture to the barn. Got inside, and my daddy started milking Helen, the cow. Didn't say a word, milked by lantern light. I played around and gave Helen a little bit of extra food. Took a while. Finally, he was finished, and we started to leave the barn and go back to the house. He pushed open the barn door and stepped up onto the threshold of the door and turned back to me. I can see him to this day. Without any warning, he said, "Aunt Laura died. But if anybody says anything about it, you just say, she passed away." I didn't get upset hearing that she died. I knew that everything died when it got old enough, and she was the oldest living thing I'd ever seen. But I couldn't figure out what passing away was. She didn't go to school. That's the only time I'd ever heard about passing. And as we came out of the barn back toward the house, I still wondered. I was starting to learn about dirty words. Could it be because my daddy took me to the barn to tell me about this that maybe for grown-up people to say somebody died is a dirty word? But I wondered, is she dead or alive? Will she be there when I get back to the house or not? Will I ever see her again or not? We had already passed my favorite walnut tree, a big tree with a split trunk you could climb up into in the winter. And just as we had gotten all the way past it, all of a sudden, the coating and weight of ice from that night before got to be too much for that walnut tree, and the whole tree went crack from top to bottom. When we jumped and looked back at the sound, we could barely see the edge of the sun creeping over the hill below the Bergens' house. It was the crack of dawn, and I had heard it, and that cleared everything up all at once. I knew that Aunt Laura was really dead, since I had heard the crack of dawn. But the most important thing was that I knew, since I could hear the crack of dawn, that Aunt Laura would never, ever be gone from me.